Assalamu alaikum, I'm Carl Arrindell and you're watching In Focus. I'm here in Gaza at the office of the Prime Minister, at the beginning as well of the holy month of Ramadan. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Ismail Haniyeh, the democratically elected Prime Minister of Palestine. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak to you.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan.
Now, I noted yesterday that you were actually leading the Tarawih prayers in the main mosque here. And in fact, I heard that you're going to be leading the Jummah prayers on Friday. Is that a tradition that's been long established here?
In the
name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Muslims all over the world, and more specifically Muslims in Europe, with the coming of this blessed month, Ramadan. And I pray that Allah will make this month a month full of good and blessing to all the world. The prayer of Taraweeh has a confirmed sunnah, which we do in every blessed month of Ramadan. And Allah has decreed for me to lead this prayer, which I have been doing for over 30 years, and led the prayers, praying to being part of the government, and will do so after. I also lead the Friday prayers and give the Friday speech, and I've been committed to it for a number of years. This commitment will still be there even after the end of my time in the ministry. We believe that this is one of the ways to maintain the harmony between power and the Quran, because when power is split from the Quran, then the nation, the Ummah, will fall into many difficulties.
Maybe this is a good example for the Prime Ministers in the West, maybe in the UK. But anyway, let's go on. I'd like to ask you, going back now to the elections of 2006, which saw the Unity Coalition elected with an overwhelming majority in an election which was described by all the independent observers as fair and true. Now, why do you think it is that the international community almost entirely refused to accept the results?
Yes, the election of 2006 was free and unbiased. It went ahead under international supervision chaired by the former President of America, Jimmy Carter, and the whole world witnessed the integrity of these elections. The Palestinians gave their trust to the Hamas movement, and Hamas then formed a government based on the large majority it gained. Unfortunately, the United States of America took the lead in taking a stand by refusing to recognize the results of the election and imposed oppressive conditions on the Palestinian people, and then imposed a blockade and gave the Israeli occupation the green light to wage a brutal war on Gaza Strip. We believe this is a form of deception regarding the democratic principles they demand, which doesn't recognize what the people want. The people have their needs, and we believe the behavior of America and, unfortunately, some European countries contradict the most basic of human rights, as well as the rules of democracy.
Now, the Western media continues to refer to Hamas as having seized control of Gaza in 2007, in some way suggesting that they stole it, took it illegitimately. Is that a reasonable or even justifiable way to describe it?
This is an unjust description and a continuation of the unjust stand they took against Hamas and against the Palestinian people after the election. The truth is Hamas is an elected government which has a majority. It formed the government and was given full trust by the Palestinian parliament in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. But sadly, there are some Palestinian parties which collaborated with foreign bodies, and they were preparing to start a military coup against Hamas and the Palestinian government. We tried to resolve this by discussions and internal agreement until we arrived at Mecca agreement. But unfortunately, the American decision, with help from some Palestinian party, was to topple the government which Hamas had formed. For that reason, we were forced to face this planned coup and to protect the legitimacy of the Palestinian people and the decision they made at the polls.
Now, the siege of Gaza, which followed, is often described as the collective punishment of the people of Gaza for expressing effectively the wrong choice at the elections. Does in your opinion, the international community as well as the government of Israel hold some sort of culpability in the process of undermining, essentially, the democratic process and in terms of its collective punishment of the people of Gaza?
Correct. And unfortunately, Israel imposed the blockade with support from the international community and the Quartet and placed Gaza in what can be compared to a big prison that forbids the movement of approximately 1.8 million Palestinian citizens. It denies their basic rights of life and has caused major humanitarian problems to the families in Gaza. The blockade of Gaza is complex. It is an economic blockade preventing imports and exports, and a financial blockade preventing money being received by banks in the Gaza Strip. It is also a political blockade in which social isolation is imposed on the people of Gaza and its government. This blockade is the first of its kind in the modern history, and it leaves a stain of shame on the international community that allows this sort of blockade on our family in Gaza.
December 2008, January 2009 saw the most brutal assault on Gaza, in which over 1,400 people were killed, many of them children and women, and most of them innocent civilians. Israel declared that Hamas had breached the ceasefire, and that was the reason for the assault. Do you accept that Hamas had breached the ceasefire and there was some justification for this assault by the Israelis?
The core of this issue is that the Palestinian people were expelled from their land over 62 years ago. We were in our houses, our farms, our fields, and the occupation transgressed against us and committed big massacres from 1947. The massacre of Deir Yassin is a witness to that. So is the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, as well as the recent massacre of Gaza. For that reason, the Israeli story is one of lies, and they always twist the truth and try to present themselves as victims and turn matters upside down. Hamas is a resistance movement, a movement for freeing the country. It does not seek anything other than freedom and establishing an independent Palestinian state. The resistance carried out by Hamas is legitimate and guaranteed by religion, customs, and international law. All nations that have fallen under occupation have exercised their right to resist the occupation. The last war was a disgusting war, with all the meaning that word can hold. Around 1,500 Palestinians were killed, 5,000 were wounded, 20,000 houses were knocked down. 5,000 families were expelled, houses and mosques and government buildings were destroyed. Hence, talking about how Hamas breached the ceasefire is merely something to excuse and justify the barbaric act in the light of unbalanced force. The Israeli army is known to be the strongest army in the region, and they used heavy weapons against innocent civilians, which resulted in this massacre and slaughter. This is why we call upon the international community and all the free people of this world to be fully aware of the struggle that is taking place in the Palestinian lands. We are unarmed civilians looking for our freedom and stability. The occupation is the one transgressing day and night on our families in Gaza, in Jerusalem, in West Bank, and everywhere.
في غزة وفي القدس وفي الضفة الغربية وفي كل مكان.
Just over a year ago, I was in Damascus and I heard Khaled Michel actually speaking, and he said that, publicly in fact, that a negotiated settlement to the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict could never come about until both Hamas and Fatah came together in unity. Is that an opinion that you share, and do you think there's any real prospect of that taking place?
The unity of the Palestinians is vital to fulfill Palestinian ambitions. The Palestinian split is harmful and does not benefit anyone other than the Israeli occupation. Hamas is seeking reconciliation, and we have tried to reconcile and be flexible. But sadly, there is an American veto against reconciliation between Palestinians. But despite that, we don't give up, and we will work with all our efforts to bring this reconciliation and Palestinian unity about, which is a vital pillar for fulfilling freedom and the right of return and independence.
Now, the premise upon which Israel, the US and the international community broadly refuse to enter into meaningful negotiations, or at least in the public eye, with you to end this conflict seem to be based on, they say, Hamas's documented commitment to not accepting the right of Israel to exist, and also Hamas's refusal to cease armed struggle. Are these legitimate claims that they make, and do you have any expectation that Hamas will perhaps make concessions on these points, if only from a pragmatic perspective?
This is a problem for the international community, not for Hamas. Hamas submitted approaches to some of the international demands, which the quartet talked about. For instance, Hamas accepted establishing a Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders, with Jerusalem as its capital, with the right of return, as well as accepting a long truce if we are achieving our state. And Hamas also said that they will not impede anything that benefits the Palestinian people. For that reason, Hamas submitted a political approach, and we believe if the international community is keen on ending the struggle over the Palestinian land, then they would have accepted what Hamas proposed realistically and positively. But it seems that they don't want this struggle to end for political, military and economic reasons, which is why they don't deal positively with anything proposed by Hamas. The proof of that is that Fatah, which is headed by Abu Mazen, also proposed many political compromises, more than what the international community expected. And until now, Abu Mazen has not been able to succeed in achieving any success in the negotiations or in retrieving the rights of the Palestinians. This is proof that it is not a fault of the Palestinians or of Hamas or of the Palestinian resistance. It is the fault of the occupation that does not want to recognize the Palestinian rights, and the fault of some international countries which support the occupation against the Palestinian people.
Many Palestinian elected officials still remain incarcerated in Israeli jails for being members of what they say a prescribed organization. Much talk in the West at the moment is still about the captured Israeli soldier Sergeant Gilad Shalit and the prospect of an exchange, interestingly, for nearly 1,000 for one. Is this genuinely sought after possibility on both sides, and what are the likely outcomes if a deal is achieved?
Yes, like you mentioned, there are thousands of Palestinians in Israeli prisons. Out of them, some have spent longer than 30 years, 25 years, 20 years, and some that have been afflicted with chronic diseases. But it seems that the media does not care for anyone other than Shalit, and they don't care much for thousands of Palestinians in Israeli prisons. We in the Palestinian government encourage reaching a deal of exchange, which put an end to the story of the Palestinian prisoners and Shalit. It seems that this is Israeli stubbornness and their refusal to submit to Palestinian demands is what is prolonging the prisoners' exchange deal.
Now, during the last fortnight, our British Prime Minister in the UK, David Cameron, made a rather controversial statement in essentially recognising something that many others have thought for a long time, that Gaza was an open prison. Now, this is something of an unusual entity for even a minister in a cabinet in a Western government, let alone a Prime Minister. It's seen as a radical departure, especially from the former administrations of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Do you think that this marks a turning point in respect to the international community's response to the siege?
We welcome the British Prime Minister's statement, and we viewed it as courageous. It is progress from the position of the previous government toward Gaza. We believe that these statements reflect Britain's refusal to continue with the blockade of Gaza and rejection of Israeli policies toward the Palestinian people. All that we now wish for is that these statements turn into acts and practical steps to break the siege of Gaza, either by putting pressure on Israel, by referring it to the Security Council, or by encouraging the convoys and flotillas that comes to Gaza.
أو بتشجيع القوافل البرية والبحرية التي تصل إلى قطاع غزة.
Talking of breaking the siege, I arrived in Gaza just 2 nights ago with a convoy of medical aid and humanitarian supplies from a coalition of NGOs, charities across Europe, people from Turkey, from France, from Belgium, Denmark. I don't want to miss anybody out, but there were a huge array of people who joined that convoy. Now, in the convoy, there were 8 members of the Turkish NGO who had been on the Mavi Marmara boat. One of the flotilla of ships, which you will be aware, was attacked on the 31st of May by Israeli forces, in which there were a number of fatalities. How significant was that episode in terms of the terms of discourse and public opinion internationally, in terms of ending potentially the siege?
The Freedom Flotilla played an important role in making the international community more aware of the plight of the Palestinians and the siege of Gaza. Israel committed a war crime when they attacked the civilians aboard the flotilla, wounding many and detaining everyone aboard. That was a wake-up call to people's consciousness, and we saw the demonstrations and protests that followed all around the world, demanding that the siege of Gaza be lifted. In simplicity, what Israel did portray to the world that there is an unjust policy toward the Palestinians, and that this siege is set down in history as injustice on the Palestinians. The world was shocked and demanded the end of this horrific siege. For that reason, the flotilla did play an important role, as well as the arrival of the Miles of Smiles convoy, organized by different European NGOs, which was carrying devices, medical equipment and cars. This is something beautiful, which we welcome greatly, and we invite the continuation of the convoys.
Now, when I came into your offices, the Prime Minister's offices here in Gaza, I couldn't help but notice a very big blue plaque on the wall, in fact the only plaque that was there, and it said Jerusalem 79 kilometres. Now, Jerusalem is the centre of a lot of controversy at the moment. Some say it is where the battle for sovereignty is going to be fought. How important is Jerusalem as an issue for Palestine?
Jerusalem for us is the capital of the Palestinian state in the political context. Religious-wise, it was the first Qibla to the prayer, it was the first Qibla to prayer and third holy shrine. It is the ascent of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to the heavens. Jerusalem, in the cultural sense, represents our civilization, not just to the nation, but to all humanity. That is why, on a political level, a religious level, and a civil level, Jerusalem is something big to us. Sadly, Jerusalem is now facing many dangers, like the Judaization of the city, digging tunnels, building settlements, demolishing the houses of the people of Jerusalem, the expulsion of the people outside the city, and the expulsion of the minister and the parliamentarians representing Jerusalem. There is an Israeli attempt to remove Jerusalem from its Arab surroundings and establishing an Israeli identity in Jerusalem. That is why we urge the Arab world, the Islamic world, and all the free people of this world to take a serious stand for the sake of protecting Jerusalem. We said that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestinian state according to the 1967 borders, and we ask the world to stand with the Palestinians to enable us to accomplish this aim.
Dr. Ismail Haniyeh, Prime Minister of Palestine, thank you so much for joining us on Islam.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Shukran. Thank you. Thank you.